really heavy Southern Oregon contingency. So that committee will meet. Does anybody here, did anybody follow the informative testimony? Raise your hand. Okay, so for the first couple weeks, they just took informational testimony. And what that informational testimony was what is processing? What are issues facing cultivators? What does law enforcement think? What does local government think? And that's kind of all they've done so far. They've canceled a number of hearings they were going to have. They completely canceled almost every piece of substantive legislation up to this point has not been heard. And we're kind of waiting to see what they're going to do. Next, not this week, but the week after, the Joint Committee will hear 3,400. Who knows what 3,400 is? Okay, 3,400 and the verdict bill, which has a number, it's 3229 or something like that. That is a bill, those are two bills, two different versions of bills that address how the medical program will be affected and or integrated into recreational. So I think that's being heard not this Monday, but next Monday. And I would also anticipate that there will be lots and lots of ongoing meetings in the legislature around those bills this week. So if you're interested in that issue, a good time to listen in, and you can go to the Oregon legislature and you can live stream the hearings. That would be a great one to listen to. I'll go back and we'll go deeper into this stuff, but I just want to give you an overall outlook of what this process looks like. Floating out there is the Oregon Health Authority. So who knows who Tom Burns is? So Tom Burns used to run the medical program, and now he is in charge of the recreational program. Is there anybody out here who now knows who runs the Oregon Health Authority medical marijuana program, other than Jeremy? No. Or Bethany? Or Lori, you know everything too. So I mean, you don't count. If I know you, you don't count. So I mean, so who runs this? This guy, Steve Wagner. And so when Tom Burns was running this program, there was a lot of contact with the community. I mean, go places, whether you like him or not, whether you agree what he does or not, he was certainly reaching out to people in the community, from your opinion, better or worse, I don't know. Steve Wagner has been relatively silent, and he will be running the medical cultivator program. He will be running the medical processing program. He will be running the House Bill 3460 dispensaries. And I will tell you that I met him for the first time like 2 weeks ago. So it is very interesting. You have OLCC, which has been very, very hot. So they're doing things too. So I went to a meeting at the OHA headquarters. I had not ever been there before. And there was like white paper all over this huge board. Like a huge board. And underneath it was like all the rules for medical. So, what changes are coming with medical? We're like under these pieces of white paper. Rules made by, and Steve was a very nice guy, but those rules were being made very much, I think, in a vacuum. So, those are your three trains. You have the OLCC go down tracks. They've got rules, they're gonna have a rules advisory committee, and come November, you're going to see some final versions of that this year. You have OHA, which is a total mystery, I think. And you have the Oregon legislature, which has grinded it to a halt. So, that's in my legislative update. I was kidding, it's not in my legislative update. I have lots more to say. So, let's talk about what we think is coming down the pike. And I was kind of not sure how to sort of address this subject, but I think it's good to kind of talk about it. I mean, how many of you are medical cultivators now? How many of you want to join the rec market when that happens? How many of you would want to join the rec market when that happens if it didn't involve OLCC? How many of you are basing that on the fact that you think Steve Wagner is fucking awesome? None of you. So I think it's something to be thinking about. I don't know, half of you raise your hands. So I think what we're going to see happen is we're going to see the medical program probably next Monday. We're going to see which of two bills move. And I think there really are two bills. And they have been very difficult, I think, for everybody involved, all of the parties who've been working on them. It's been a fractious and challenging thing. And I'm hoping that come next Monday that everybody will, that something will move out of the committee. Essentially, the Buckley bill, which is 3,400, and the Burdick bill are in some ways very similar. They allow OHA to retain control of the medical program. The medical program in both versions of that bill are seriously tightened up, especially plant numbers. There will be some sort of tracking. There will be some sort of licensing. There will be some sort of security. What that looks like, the two bills are mostly different in plant count, 24 or 48 plants being the cap for medical production per physical location. I'm trying to think of what else is different in there. There are restrictions on residential grows. I know that the Sungrown Guild, who's down here, have been working on making sure that rural residential is not included on that. It's super important. Not just down here. I mean, I think it feels a little bit like everyone is so far away from each other, but the rural residential issue addresses and hits everybody. We have rural residential in Clackamas County and Lynn County and all over the state of Oregon, Deschutes County, which, by the way, if all else fails, Deschutes County is super friendly. So, you know, I think that even though it maybe feels very far away, everyone generally has the same concerns. So I expect something to move next Monday. Or I expect shit to totally blow up next Monday. I think those are the two options of what happens. Because the impact of this standstill, from my perspective, and again, I know, I'm sure there are people in here who will agree or disagree, but I think the effect of this standstill around this one issue is that we are not talking about some super important things. We are not talking about local tax. Who lives in Jackson County? Who's going to stay in Jackson County if you have to pay a 25% tax on top of the producer tax? I know you. So, yeah, right? So, I mean, we're not talking about local tax. We are not talking about local government at all. So, if you are Scott Winkles represents cities, Rob Lovett represents counties. If you're Scott and Rob, you're stoked, because this has been a huge distraction. I mean, we are so busy talking about this one issue where we are really very, very, very close to each other, that we're not talking about the things that will actually and effectively put you out of business. So, what is going to happen? And I know that Alex is going to talk about local government, so I don't want to go too far into that issue. But let me back up for a second. So what I'm hoping will happen is that something will move, and some people are going to hate it, and some people are going to love it, or like any compromise and settlement, every single one of us is going to hate it, and it's just what we're going to have to work with. Something is going to move, and hopefully we can move on to important things. Not that this isn't important, but the longer this drags out, the legislature has deadlines for things. The legislature needs to move bills. They need to get amendments out. There are deadlines for all sorts of things in the legislature. And then once things get out of committee, right, in the joint committee that hears all the bills initially, then it has to move through the rest of the legislature. If it has a fiscal impact, it has to go to revenue. So, I mean, good luck getting anything out of a revenue-neutral revenue committee. So, it's something to think about, that if we get stopped up too much, we're not going to address these local government issues. Let's talk about local government for a second. So, I mean, you guys are getting effed here. And up in Portland and all over the state too, I'm sure you saw what's happening in Lynn County. I'm sure you've seen what Tualatin has done. Clackamas County has some crazy ass ordinance that we're going to start going to meetings on. I can almost not go to another planning commission meeting without losing my mind. Because we have no guidance from the legislature, we are making rules around cannabis in the most crazy patchwork formation that does nobody any good. If you're gonna stay medical, it sucks for you. If you're gonna go rec, it sucks for you. So what do we do? I mean, what are the ways to fix that? We can deal with it on the legislative level. And then I'll talk some more about OLCC, OHA, and then answer questions. So, let's start with taxes. So I have been talking to some people in Jackson County and working on the taxation issue. I reached out to Rob Bovett, who, was a DA, and now he does counties. He's really kind of a political guy. Thank you. I'm going to dump this over myself while I talk. Thank you. So I reached out to Rob Bovett. So the legislature, we went to every single 5 minutes. Okay. Well, 5 minutes to answer questions. So we went to every single legislator on the Joint Committee 2 weeks ago, and we got every single one of them to agree that they're going to put some strong preemption language in a bill. It's going to come in through an amendment, but to agree to strong preemption language, which would prevent local taxation from happening. So I am sure we are not the only people out there working on it. I'm sure New Approach is working on it, the Sunroom Guild is working on it, we're working on it. I think every advocate can get behind the idea that you cannot create individual local taxation. It won't work, it will create huge problems. I mean, it creates lots of problems in collection, it creates an uneven playing field for both rec and medical, it creates lots and lots of issues. So everybody is working on that as soon as we can kind of move on from where we've been. Now, nothing is so easy, right? Like, it's not like the 3 groups I just mentioned are gonna go in and say, we want this to happen, and everyone's magically gonna be like, okay, that's fantastic. We'll just give you what you want. I mean, local government, cities and counties are very powerful, and they want a piece of the pie for this. So once it gets out of committee, even though the committee is particularly favorable for this, it still has to make its way through the rest of the caucuses. So, it's like no sleep till the end of the session, right? So we'll see what happens to those. But I think my personal feeling is that it would be a total devastation to recreational program and the medical program if they can tax things differently in every county and every city. And the same thing for zoning, the same thing for, every piece of local government. And I know some of you are seeing that happen in Jackson County, where they're trying to say that you cannot run a medical cannabis cultivation business in EFU land, or in rural residential, or because it's not farm use, because the language in the statute says it's not for profit. So if individual counties can do that, it will suck for everybody. How many minutes do I have?
Like 2
minutes, okay. So, let me talk about what I think you can expect in 2 minutes. I think you can expect the legislature to absolutely drag their feet for the next, I'm gonna say 2 months. I think they're gonna move, I know they're gonna move 2 omnibus bills, and they're gonna move a technical changes bill. Those 2 omnibus bills will ultimately deal with medical and rec. However they wind up doing that will be its own issue. The technical bill will be just essentially fixes that everybody agrees need to happen. And what else moves is kind of a mystery. But that's the legislature's plan at this point, the best laid plans. OLCC will move forward whether that happens or not. I mean, they are drafting rules with really little or no direction from the legislature. And I'm not saying that meetings aren't happening behind closed doors around that. I'm just saying that OLCC and the legislature maybe are not always on the same page as each other. So somebody is going to have to give who that is at this stage, from my perspective, is a total mystery. And on the side, where nobody is paying any attention, is OHA. And they're making rules. And those rules are going to have just as dramatic of an impact on the medical program as anything else. So, I can come back in 60 days when I have something more interesting or informative to offer, but I mean, that's what we know now. I think next Monday is a big deal in the legislature. I think next week is a big deal for OLCC, and I think you're going to see rules come out for rec probably in the next 30 to 45 days. But do not forget to pay attention to OHA. If you are going to continue to be a medical producer, if you're going to continue to be a 3460 dispensary, that is happening, and nobody's paying attention to that. So I'm supposed to open this to questions. I said that all really fast, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so these bills that are going to affect medical, is that going to go into effect right away, or are we good for this year?
So this is the suggested, I'm going to dump this copy on myself. So they will not, that's a good question. So I mean, the Jackson County tax, and this is, I'm going to sideways answer your question. I mean, the Jackson County tax goes into effect April 1st. So I do want to say something that I did learn, which is that the Jackson County tax is not actually retroactive. I know that that's what it looks like and how it reads, but I got clarification from County Council and Rob Obed that that's actually not true. So I don't know if that helps. So the answer is, you are fine for this year. Unless something has an emergency clause in it, which these bills, none of them have an emergency clause, at least that I've seen. Unless they have an emergency clause, which means they go into effect immediately when they're signed, they won't go into effect this year. So the OLCC rec implementation schedule looks something like January, producer licenses, right, that's cultivators. November, October, September, something like that for retailers, and somewhere in the middle for at least part of the processor license. So it won't affect medical this year. You certainly have another year, and maybe more after that. In the back? With the sunglasses and the amnesia shirt on?
The concept 3929?
Is that the verdict bill? That's the verdict bill. So I do. I think that the verdict bill and the Buckley bill are very similar. So I think, I mean, with some changes, I mean, we just saw a bill draft a few days ago. I think that the verdict bill is pretty good. It leaves medical under OHA, which has been requested. It creates a kind of tracking light system, which I know you've all been talking about. But remember, OHA is a mystery, so who knows what they'll do with tracking light? Who knows what they're going to do with the security piece? But at this point, and I've told every legislator who's asked, I just want them to move something. Like, I would support any of those. I hope that they are able to come together and take the good things in 3400 and the good things in the verdict bill and smush those into something that works for everybody and move them out of committee, because they're going to get stocked up later. Those all have fiscals. So I support that bill. I support pushing them together and pulling the best pieces, but I want something to move.
Can you just touch on what is more specifically in those bills as far as security or tracking light? I don't know what tracking light is.
So one of the concerns that people had about tracking medical product was, especially from Southern Oregon, but from all over, was that it was cost